The dream had a name, and that name was passive income. It was the most beautiful phrase in the English language. It was a mantra, a prayer, a destination. For me, it wasn't about greed. It was about time. I had a good life, a successful career as a project manager, a wife I adored, and 2 kids who were my entire world. But I was a slave to the clock. My life was a series of sprints between deadlines, of late nights at the office, of missed soccer games and recital rehearsals. I was providing for my family, but I was absent from them, a ghost in our own home, my mind always somewhere else, wrestling with budgets and timelines. The dream of passive income was the dream of being present. It was the dream of a life where my time was my own, where my income wasn't tied to the hours I sold, but to the assets I owned. I devoured the gospel of financial freedom. I listened to the podcasts, read the books, and filled notebooks with plans. My wife, bless her heart, was more grounded. She saw the comfortable life we already had, the solid, if unspectacular, investments in our stock market portfolio, the steady growth of our retirement accounts. She was a believer in the slow, patient path, but I was a man in a hurry. I saw the years slipping by, my kids growing up in fast forward, and I felt a desperate, clawing urgency to escape the rat race before it consumed me completely. That's when I found Azure Elysia. It wasn't just a real estate development. It was a perfectly packaged dream. Glossy brochures filled with CGI renderings of infinity pools melting into a turquoise sea. A slick website with drone footage of a pristine, white-sand beach on some sun-drenched, exotic coastline. It was a planned community of luxury villas, pitched as a premier investment opportunity. They promised guaranteed rental yields, a professional management company that would handle everything, and a hands-off, turnkey path to the life I craved. It was presented as the ultimate asset, far more stable than the volatile world of stocks or the nascent, risky business of Bitcoin. The seduction was masterful. I attended webinars hosted by a charismatic frontman, a tanned, silver-haired orator who spoke not of units and square footage, but of legacies and lifestyles. He painted a picture of a community of like-minded investors, all escaping the mediocrity of the 9-to-5. He created a sense of intense urgency, of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that was closing fast. My professional training in risk management should have set off alarm bells, but my analysis was clouded by a powerful case of confirmation bias. I saw only what I wanted to see. I did my due diligence, but it was a perfunctory, box-sticking exercise. The company was registered offshore, which they explained was for tax efficiency. The glowing testimonials were from people I couldn't independently verify. I convinced myself that my caution was just the lingering stench of the rat race, the fear-based thinking of an employee, not an owner. I was ready to make the leap. I laid it all out for my wife one night on the dining room table, spreading the glossy brochures over the very spot where we paid our monthly bills. I spoke his language, the language of the dream. I talked about freedom, about time with the kids, about a future where our income was a gentle, flowing river, not a bucket I had to haul every single day. I saw the worry in her eyes. "It's everything," she said, her voice soft. "It's the kids' college fund, it's our retirement, it's the house." She was the voice of reason, the anchor to my high-flying kite. But I was so convinced, so utterly consumed by the vision, that I saw her prudence as a failure of imagination. "All a budget does is tell the money where to go," I quoted from one of my podcasts. "And I'm telling it to go create our freedom. This isn't a risk. The only risk is doing nothing, of waking up in 20 years in the exact same place." I was relentless. I was passionate. And in the end, because she trusted me, she agreed. Her consent was the last key I needed to unlock our future. The process was a whirlwind. I liquidated everything. The blue-chip stocks I had so carefully accumulated, the mutual funds, the emergency savings. It felt like a cleansing fire, burning away the old life to make way for the new. But even with all of that, it wasn't enough to secure one of the premier villas, the ones with the best ocean views and the highest projected rental income. To get one of those, I needed more capital. So I did the unthinkable. I walked into our bank, the same bank that held the mortgage on our family home, and I took out a massive personal credit line using the equity in our house as collateral. The loan officer, a man who had helped us with our first car loan, looked at me with concern as he explained the terms, the high interest rate, the personal guarantee. I just smiled, filled with the serene confidence of a true believer. The debt was just a tool, a necessary lever to launch us into a new stratosphere of wealth. The day I sent the wire transfer, a seven-figure sum that represented the totality of our past and the entirety of our future, my hand trembled as I clicked the mouse. For a single, heart-stopping moment, I felt a wave of pure terror, but it was quickly replaced by an exhilarating sense of power. I had done it. I had broken free. I walked out of my office and looked up at the sky, a man who had just bought his own freedom. I had no idea I had just sold my soul. For the first 6 months, life was a blissful confirmation of my own genius. The communication from the Azure Elysia developers was flawless. Every month, a glossy e-newsletter would arrive in my inbox, filled with stunning photos of progress. I saw foundations being poured, walls going up. The beautiful turquoise see a constant, tantalizing presence in the background. My villa, Villa 7, was pointed out in diagrams, its prime location highlighted. It was real, it was happening. To cement my confidence, the first few guaranteed rental income payments arrived in my bank account like clockwork. They weren't large sums, just enough to cover the interest on the massive debt I had taken on, but they were proof of concept. The system worked. My passive income machine was humming to life. The effect on me was profound. The constant, grinding stress that had been my companion for years began to melt away. I was more relaxed, more present with my family. I stopped bringing my work home. I coached my son's baseball team. I was there for every school play. My wife, seeing the change in me and the money appearing in our account, let go of her lingering fears. We started to dream together, planning the trips we would take, the life we would lead once the villa was complete and the full rental income started to flow. The dream was no longer a distant abstraction. It had a name, a location, and it was paying dividends. The first crack in the facade was a delayed payment. It was a week late. I sent a polite email. The response, which took another week, was apologetic and full of plausible excuses. A banking holiday in their country, a new international transfer protocol, administrative friction. I accepted it. These things happen. But then the next month's payment was also late. And the newsletter, which had always been so slick and detailed, was now a single page with a generic photo of a beach and a vague, jargon-filled update about optimizing supply chains. The low hum of anxiety started in the back of my mind. I tried to call my main contact, the charismatic salesman who had sold me the dream. His number was disconnected. I told myself it was nothing. He probably got a promotion, a new number, but the hum got a little louder. I started spending my evenings not with my family, but with my laptop, falling down the rabbit hole of the internet. I found an online forum for other Azure Elysia investors. The early pages were filled with the same giddy optimism I had felt. But as I scrolled closer to the present, the tone began to shift. People were asking questions. Has anyone received their payment for October? Is anyone else having trouble getting a response from the management team? Does anyone have recent, non-company photos of the construction site? My obsession shifted from celebrating my brilliant investment to frantically searching for validation that I hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. Sleep became a stranger. I would lie awake at night, my heart pounding, replaying every conversation, scrutinizing every document, looking for the red flag I had so willingly ignored. I became irritable and distant. The relaxed, present father and husband disappeared, replaced by a tense, haunted man who was constantly staring at his phone, his face illuminated by a sickly blue glow. My wife noticed the change immediately. The ghost was back, but this time it was a different kind of haunting. "What's wrong?" she would ask, her voice laced with a gentle, rising fear. "Is it the project?" "No, everything's fine," I would lie, my voice too sharp, too defensive. "Just some minor delays, it's a big project." "This is normal." I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't admit that our entire future, the future I had promised her, was potentially a mirage. The shame was a physical barrier in my throat, choking me. I was isolating myself from her, from the one person who could have been my anchor, because I couldn't bear to see the look of "I told you so" that I was sure would be in her eyes. I was alone with my rising panic. The final, fatal blow came not from the company, but from a small, independent journalist in the country where the project was located. Someone on the forum posted a link to his blog. The headline read, "The Gilded Cage, How International Investors Were Duped by a Multi-Million-Dollar Real Estate Scam." The article was a brutal, meticulous demolition of the entire enterprise. It had pictures. Not the glossy, professional shots from the company, but candid, grainy photos of the construction site. It was an abandoned wasteland, a few concrete shells already being reclaimed by the jungle. Rebar rusted in the salty air. The "Welcome to Azure Elysia" sign was half fallen, a monument to a lie. The developer, a man with a history of similar fraudulent startups, had vanished months ago, along with all the investors' money. The initial dividend payments had been a classic Ponzi scheme tactic, using new investors' money to pay off the early ones, creating the illusion of a profitable enterprise. It was all gone, every penny. The kids' college fund, our retirement, the money we had borrowed against our home. I sat there in the dark, my laptop the only source of light in the room, and I felt the floor of my world dissolve beneath me. The hum of anxiety became a deafening roar. This wasn't just a bad investment. This was a demolition. The multi-million-dollar debt was real. The passive income was a fantasy. And in the chilling silence of my office, I felt a distinct, terrifying snap. It was the sound of my own sanity breaking. The snap was followed by a freefall. The world I knew, the one governed by logic and consequence, ceased to exist. In its place was a new reality, a terrifying, suffocating landscape of pure fear. The first panic attack hit me in the car. I was driving home from work. The journalist's article seared onto the back of my eyelids, when my heart suddenly started to pound like a trapped bird against my ribs. The air in the car thickened, became unbreathable. My hands went numb on the steering wheel. I was convinced I was having a heart attack, that I was dying right there on the freeway. I managed to pull over to the shoulder, gasping for air, the world outside my windshield warping and blurring. It passed after a few terrifying minutes, leaving me drenched in sweat and trembling, but the psychic wound it left was deep. The world was no longer safe. The attacks became my constant, unwelcome companions. They would ambush me without warning, in the checkout line at the grocery store, in the middle of a meeting at work, in the dead of night. My life became a series of desperate calculations to avoid potential triggers, which meant avoiding life itself. I stopped driving on the freeway. I stopped going to crowded places. I began to see threats everywhere. A stranger's glance was a judgment. The ringing of the phone was a summons from the bank, a harbinger of doom. Paranoia began to weave its tendrils into my thoughts. I was convinced I was being watched, that the people behind the scam, these shadowy, faceless criminals, were monitoring me, laughing at my ruin. I would check the locks on the doors a dozen times before bed. I would peek through the blinds at every car that passed on our street. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a flimsy fortress under siege. My family bore the brunt of my descent. I was a ghost haunting our home, gaunt and unshaven, my eyes wide with a terror I couldn't explain. I would go for days without speaking, locked in a silent, internal battle. Then, suddenly, the pressure would become too much, and I would explode with a rage that was terrifying to them and to me. I would scream about injustice, about being a fool, my anger a desperate, misdirected howl of my own self-hatred. My wife tried, with a courage I couldn't comprehend, to reach me. She would try to hold me, to talk to me, to break through the wall of my fear. But I pushed her away violently. Her love felt like a spotlight on my failure. Her sympathy felt like pity, and pity was gasoline on the fire of my shame. "You don't understand," I would scream at her, my voice raw. "You can't understand. I did this, I ruined us." I was so lost in my own personal hell that I couldn't see I was dragging my family into the flames with me. The kids grew quiet and watchful, their laughter replaced by a nervous energy. They would give me a wide berth, tiptoeing around the house as if I were a sleeping monster who could wake at any moment. I saw the fear in their eyes when they looked at me, and that knowledge was the cruelest torture of all. The letters from the bank started arriving, their formal, implacable language detailing our default on the loan. The foreclosure process had begun. The tangible consequence of my folly was now a matter of public record. We were losing our home. The passive income dream, the grand plan to secure my family's future, had culminated in their eviction. That was my legacy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I was in the grip of another panic attack, pacing the living room like a caged animal, unable to breathe, convinced the walls were closing in. My wife stood in the doorway, her face a mask of exhaustion and despair. My daughter was peeking out from behind her, her small face pale with fear. In that moment, my wife's love for me collided with her primal need to protect our children. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice shaking but firm. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. "I love you, but I can't let you destroy them. I can't let you destroy yourself. You need help, real help. If you don't get it, the kids and we have to leave. I have to get them somewhere safe." The word safe struck me like a physical blow. Their father, their protector, had become the danger in their lives, the monster. Her words, born of desperation and love, finally pierced through the thick fog of my paranoia. I stopped pacing. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw not an accuser but a woman pushed to the absolute limit, fighting for the survival of our family. I looked at my daughter's terrified face, and then I looked at my own trembling hands. I was at the absolute bottom. I had lost our fortune. I was losing our home, and now I was a breath away from losing the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The choice was stark. I could let go and fall the rest of the way, or I could reach for the hand that was still, against all odds, being offered to me. The next morning, my wife made a phone call. I sat on the sofa, a hollowed-out man, and listened as she spoke in low, calm tones to a receptionist at a mental health clinic. She made an appointment for me. It was the most profound act of surrender and the first act of courage I had shown in months. Walking into that therapist's office was like walking into my own trial. I expected judgment, condemnation. Instead, I found a quiet, patient man who simply listened. For the first time, I told the whole story, from the seductive promise of passive income to the terrifying emptiness of my panic attacks. I laid the full, ugly scope of my shame and guilt on the table. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, and when I was done, he said, "Okay, that's where we'll start." Therapy was not a quick fix. It was a slow, arduous process of dismantling the prison I had built for myself. I learned that the panic attacks were not heart attacks. They were storms of fear, and he taught me how to breathe through them, how to anchor myself in the present moment when my mind was trying to drag me into a catastrophic future. I learned that my obsession with easy money wasn't just about escaping work. It was about a deep-seated fear of not being good enough, a need for a grand, external validation of my worth. The scam hadn't broken me. It had just exposed the cracks that were already there. While I was working on my mind, my wife was dealing with the brutal reality of our finances. Together, with the guidance of a lawyer, we made the decision to declare bankruptcy. It was a public and humiliating process, a formal admission of our ruin, but it was also a liberation. The monstrous, multi-million-dollar debt that had haunted my every waking moment was gone. The phone calls stopped. The threatening letters ceased. It was a brutal, painful amputation, but it stopped the poison from spreading. We lost the house. The day we moved out was one of the saddest of my life. I watched as my wife and kids said goodbye to the only home they had ever known, a home I had sacrificed on the altar of a foolish dream. We moved into a small, two-bedroom rental apartment that felt like a shoebox. But inside that shoebox, a fragile, tentative healing began. My wife got a full-time job at a local school. The shift in our dynamic was profound. She was no longer just my supportive partner. She was our family's rock, our primary provider. I saw a strength and resilience in her that I had taken for granted for years. Our relationship, which had been shattered, began to reform, pieced back together with shards of honesty and a newfound, hard-won respect. I couldn't go back to my old career. The stress would have broken me. On my therapist's advice, I took a job at a local garden center. It was manual labor, loading bags of soil, watering plants, talking to people about fertilizer. The income was a tiny fraction of what I used to make, but it was real. I came home tired, my muscles aching, my hands dirty, but my mind was quiet. There was a simple, grounding honesty to the work that was more therapeutic than any pill. My definition of wealth began to change. I found it not in a bank statement, but in the small, quiet moments that I had been too busy chasing a dream to notice before. It was the sight of my two kids, sharing a room and somehow becoming closer because of it. It was the easy laughter I shared with my wife as we cooked dinner together in our cramped kitchen. It was the peace of mind that came after a long day of physical work. My relentless pursuit of a passive income had made me completely passive in my own life. Now, with an active, humble job, I was finally an active participant in my own family. One afternoon, my son came home with a drawing from school. It was a picture of our family standing in front of our small apartment building. We were all holding hands and we were all smiling. Underneath, he had written, "My home." I looked at that simple, crayon drawing and I understood. I hadn't lost everything. In fact, I had come dangerously close to losing the only things that were ever truly real. The scam took my money, my house, and my pride. But it couldn't take my family, and in the end, it gave me back my sanity. I no longer dream of a life of passive income. I'm content with the small, active, and deeply precious life I have. I learned that the ultimate risk management isn't about protecting your portfolio. It's about protecting what is priceless. Before you go, let me ask, where in the world are you? Drop your country in the comments, and let's map out the global our family. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more real stories.